being here today. My name is Paul Scott. Yes, I'm standing in for Ishra Batch. I'm really pleased to have a chat to you today about what we've been doing in mobility as a service, and essentially making what is MAS real in Queensland. Today, we're actually going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing in mobility as a service, particularly around our revenue model that we've been talking about, and we'll understand how important that revenue model is for moving forward, particularly for public transport ticketing, and how that will integrate into a mobility as a service operating system. We'll also have a bit of a little chat about our UQ, or our University of Queensland Mobility as a Service trial. And finally, I'll just really briefly run over our program into the next little while. You may know a little bit about Queensland with one of my colleagues speaking earlier, being Vincent. Queensland is a fairly large state. Obviously, in Australia, it's the third largest state in Australia, so second largest state. We, as TMR, have a series of fairly significant regulatory responsibilities. We cover land, air, rail, and sea around transport infrastructure in Queensland. It means that we do things from anything from driver licensing through to building roads, and of course building rail lines and those sorts of things. A couple of quick stats up there just on the screen just to tell you a little bit about what we do, but essentially we're an agency of the Queensland government, and we regulate the transport system in Queensland. Now, for MAS, we've been on the MAS journey, I suppose, since about 2018, a little bit earlier than that in some respects, and doing some precursor work, but the current group that we have set up is from 2018. The vision of Queensland in terms of TMR is that we create a single integrated transport network that's accessible to everybody. So we've been really focusing on, particularly for mobility as a service, what it means beyond the private vehicle. So when we have things like automated vehicles and those sort of different systems that will come online into the future, is there a different operating model for transport and for how we go and for how people will actually get around? And of course, we also need to make sure that our system is accessible and it has equity across the board. So there's a series of benefits that we've been talking about when we talk about mobility as a service. It's, of course, the customer responsive services. We're really wanting to get our customers into some customer responsive services and being responsive to everybody that's out there in Queensland. We're interested in ensuring that we've got enhanced livability and land use in Queensland. It's a fairly geographically dispersed area. There's a lot of challenges around our ensuring that our network is up to speed. We have a lot of cyclones in Queensland, so our network tends to go underwater in some instances. We know that for MAS, there's actually some real road safety benefits in terms of modal shift, so getting people out of their private vehicle and into things like public transport. So our public transport system is inherently more safe. We also want to provide improved value for money for our customers. So we know that public transport systems around the world are fundamentally difficult to operate from a revenue point of view. And we're trying to make sure that our customers receive the best value option for us and for that. So our vision in MAS and what we've done in MAS so far, and this talks a little bit about what our economics looks like and what we've talked about. Essentially, there's a series of benefits for MAS. There's the customer benefits, consumer trip benefits, and reduced private vehicle ownership. That's really intent here. Remember that in Queensland, unlike a lot of other states or even countries for that matter, we've got a large amount of cars per population. And there's not a lot of public transport. The distances are really, really quite large. People can travel hundreds of kilometres just to get to work or even to the next town. So for us, mobility as a service is a real challenge. We get really highly dense populations and also really sparse populations. So that's really important to get ourselves into a better mode. But we do see with mobility as a service, better consumer benefits, better public control and better private and public benefits, so better public transport utilisation, community benefits through health and safety. So mobility as a service essentially can push people or nudge people into more active modes of transport and those sorts of things, which is really another part of our remit as a transport regulator. And then, of course, it's about the negative externalities that cars and those sorts of things actually have at the moment. So how do we actually then push towards a better environment in Queensland? I'll talk a little bit about our commercial and revenue model. Now, importantly, this is a really important part for us. The public transport ticket, fundamentally, we have in Queensland a Go card. We're currently, as Vincent said before, we're transitioning to a smart ticketing a service, which is an EMV-based, account-based system. Now, in order to then be able to deal with mobility as a service operators who choose to come in and say, hey, I want to consume that EMV-based ticket in a particular way. So how do they do that? And that's really a core part. So late last year, we did some work around a commercial and revenue model. So this is the sort of backbone arrangements for how we need to deal with these things. And we actually essentially are dealing with these things through a set of different options that we've come up with. We've come up with about 6 options. I'm going to talk them through to see what they are. Now, our first option, so these are the 6 options that we have. The first one is a simple access. I'll take a little bit of time on this particular slide. The system access simple and system access complex. So they're the first 2 options that we talk about. We know that in public transport, there's a whole range of different incentives, concessions, all those sorts of things, which make the public transport ticket actually quite a complex beast to grapple with. Our first 2 options deal with essentially, and the first option is a simple option, and that's where the mobility operator is charged with a period-based, sort of like a time-based situation. They sign up through their app, so people sign up through their app basically, and the system gives the mass operator access to the PT services and those sorts of things. So it might be a week or a month subscription-based type service. The complex one is a little bit more difficult. We have a zonal-based fare system, so the further you travel, the more essentially you're charged. Excuse me. And this particular service, this particular option, really starts to mold into quite a difficult, sort of pretty complex way of dealing with that. So it might be a mobility operator charge so many zones for so many tickets, etc. The next one's a prepaid value. And prepaid value is a little bit like our Go card. It's like a top-up, essentially, where the mass operator might pay, let's say they pay $1,000 for an amount of value that's across the system, and then they get maybe $1,200 worth of ticketing in that particular space. So that's that third option. The fourth option is a wholesale or a prepaid ticket option that we needed to have a think about how that actually works. This is particularly relevant in our EMV based system and tickets and these sorts of things. And the last one's a postpaid option, and we'll see when we just briefly get into the other part and into our proof of concept, is that the prepaid option is the one that we're actually using at the moment, which relies basically to say, postpaid, where we basically charge out the mass operator for their use and those sorts of things. So the revenue model, we did some assumptions and obviously did some options assessment, and of course these different options are listed here quite clearly. The first, we obviously talked about the revenue impact, the impact to us and TMR. Revenue is quite important, obviously, for everybody, particularly inside our world in the space. The next piece, we talked about the potential impact of the mobility operator in terms of their commercial sustainability. So this slide sort of represents these things. The other one is about our other commercial revenue, whether there's anything else that we might be able to do. Dynamic pricing, our business exit risk, which is really important in terms of dealing with new mobility operators that come in or new mass operators that come in. how it deals with our incentives. So we've got a group of incentives in Queensland and how that's dealt with. And then finally, the implementation complexity and operational complexity. So they're the things that we've done. So on the screen, we can basically see that really both the system access, complex and simple, have the best sort of financial outcome potentially for us. But there's assumptions around users and frequency of travel that we need to deal with. And of course, there's pricing levels of periodic and access. We can see that in a series of the other ones here, so the wholesale of prepaid tickets, there's value in there, but additionally, there's a level of complexity that may well be missed when we're dealing with some of this sort of stuff. Basically, so that's our series of options. We can see that essentially, like the prepaid value situation is one of those, probably the best option at the moment. As we walk through, though, in the next steps, we'll see how that actually will essentially stack up. Our trial, I'll just briefly talk about our trial, because our trial actually deals with, and I'll flick back one slide, our trial deals with the postpaid option, which essentially means that at the University of Queensland, students and staff get to run around on as a fully functional mass application that integrates a number of different modes. They can fully book, pay, and journey on these modes. The public transport option is actually a flash pass situation. So people come in to a flash pass, and then we have a leveling back to the TransLink, which is who are us, of course, our passenger transport area. So there's a reconciliation back at a period in which we then pay for those trips as the mobility service operator. So that's only just started. It runs until June 2022, and once it's finished, we'll have some really good ideas about how that works. I'll just spend a little bit of time on the next steps and what we're here for the next 3 years. We have a mobility as a service set of foundational work that we're actually talking to at the moment. Now that's for about 3 years worth of work. And what our goal is here is to start to stand up the technology and the technology that we need to consider when we're talking about mobility as a service. And the first one of that is actually the digital token. So this is how the mass operator essentially connects into the public transport ticket in Queensland, and then is able to provide different products to their customers. So they might provide an as a service product or a prepaid product or something similar, and combine as much as what they need to combine within that. So whether they're providing ride share or e-scooters, so shared scooters, or shared bike schemes or anything like that. And of course, other things that we may have. The other part of our technology program is developing our mass operator scheme, and this essentially is dealing with us as a transport regulator and providing an application of last resort in that. We're also talking about integration. Of course, the Transport Department here in Queensland, TMR, is a large organisation. We've got many different digital channels and many different services that we have for people. And we really need to make sure that we're integrating and providing a solid and an integrated voice and set of services to people in Queensland. So we're making sure that we're not just dealing in isolation with those areas. The last major part of our program is a mass and mobility foundations. We need to recognise that mass and mobility, they are separate sort of things, but together that's where you draw the value from. So that's important. So we need to identify and review our current regulatory environment. We have to make sure that we have the best fit for purpose regulatory environment to enable an ecosystem of mobility as a service operators and other technology providers that will come in, provide those good products to people. We are dealing with a future data model and state and how that looks like in this particular piece. And then we're obviously dealing with starting to step up new and different pilots. So we talked about the pilot there in the proof of concept, plus we're also considering others. And of course, backed on all of this is developing that evidence base. So look, really great to be here today, and thank you very much for talking, for listening in to me. And we're really excited to see what happens next. Thanks, Greg.